Welcome to the Source One podcast. Consider us your source for all things procurement, supply management, and strategic sourcing, anytime, anywhere. In any sourcing event, it's important to develop a standardized set of criteria for assessing prospective suppliers. An apples-to-apples comparison is the only way to determine which option will provide the most strategic value. In logistics, where suppliers have developed proprietary pricing schemes and discount structures, this process can be decidedly challenging. Source One senior consultant Ken Ballard is a recognized expert in logistics procurement. He joins the Source One podcast to discuss best practices for standardizing the negotiation and contracting stages within the space. Achieving an apples-to-apples comparison in logistics is challenging, but with Ballard's insights, you'll find it's far from impossible.
My name's Ken Ballard. I'm a consultant with Source One. I work on our supply chain team, sourcing a variety of different categories, anywhere from domestic and international freight to more direct materials, MRO, professional services, and a lot of things in between. Today, I want to talk a little bit about sourcing logistics spend, specifically LTL, which just stands for Less-than-Truckload. So logistics is a highly complex category, and it's oftentimes mismanaged from a sourcing perspective. There's a lot of moving pieces and different factors that need to be taken into consideration when evaluating the total cost of a specific transit lane of getting something from point A to point B. Today I just want to focus on LTL and talk through some of the sourcing best practices and challenges. Just to start, it's really essential to compare apples to apples when you're looking at LTL spend and looking at the pricing structures amongst different carriers. The way that the industry is set up today, it really doesn't allow for that. All the different carriers have different tariff structures, and I'll get into what a tariff structure means. Over the years, carriers have developed these proprietary tariff structures or pricing systems, also sometimes referred to as base rates. A majority of the total cost of getting something from point A to point B can be attributed to this tariff structure. Obviously, there's additional costs other than just the tariff-based charge, such as a fuel surcharge, handling surcharges, and depending on the carriers, there might be some other surcharges as well. But like I said, the biggest challenge to evaluating the spend category is just the proprietary nature of this pricing scheme, that considering each carriers use a different tariff structure that is custom to their own operating structure, their infrastructure, and essentially it's kind of like a regression formula, whereas they put different weights on different factors of cost. So it's virtually impossible to compare tariff to tariff. How these carriers are pricing that tariff is they'll give you a discount from their tariff. So a 30% discount off of YRC's proprietary tariff is going to be a lot different than a 30% discount from FedEx's tariff. The tariffs are made up of a lot of different factors, like I mentioned, like weight, volumetric size. What I mean by volumetric size is think of something like an odd-shaped item, like a deer antlers. It is very light, however, it takes up a lot of space. It needs to be packaged different. It could take up a whole entire pallet, whereas something that weighs 5 times as much and happens to be bigger, it might just fit really nicely on a pallet, and you can kind of fit those more square items closer together. It takes up less room on a truck, less volumetric weight. Other things that come into consideration are mileage of a route, origin and the actual destinations of where it's going, any packing requirements. And once all these inputs are entered into the tariff calculator that each of these carriers have, it's going to give you a different price. So how they actually formulate those weights to calculate their tariff, it's going to be a lot based on their operating structure, so what infrastructure they have in place. So, for example, if they have a lot of depot locations or service locations in Maine and New Hampshire, you'll probably get a pretty good rate if you're shipping something just in between New England, for example. Whereas if you look at YRC, they might operate more in the Midwest and have a lot more infrastructure out there to kind of support the transport of goods. So therefore, their tariff calculator is going to be configured a little bit different, and you're going to get a more competitive price for a lane out in that region. Availability of trucks, another factor, just kind of speaks for itself. If they have a lot more trucks going back and forth, it's a lot easier to kind of commingle your product into their transportation network. You'll get a better price. And like I said, just kind of their overall operating strategy of where they want to push business to certain regions where it makes sense. And again, they can kind of give you a more competitive discount in that specific region. So when you're evaluating these discounts off of tariff structures, it's virtually impossible to compare it apples to apples, so you need some way of standardizing it. The way that we standardize it is to go to a standard tariff that any carrier can easily subscribe to. Good example is Zarlite. So Zarlite's just a tariff structure that you can essentially just pay a subscription for. It uses all of the same factors of cost, and it's a pretty standard best practice. It's held by most major carriers. I haven't really seen any instances where someone is not able to provide a Zarlite tariff. So when you actually do go through an RFP process and you're inviting multiple different carriers, long story short, you just need to have them quoting on a level playing field. So you can compare a 30% discount to a 40% discount. That 40% discount is truly more competitive because it's based on the same tariff structure, that being Zarlite. It enables you to be able to compare apples to apples when you get bids back, all on the same tariff structure. So when running a sourcing event, it's imperative that you do this. And a lot of times I've seen where stakeholders and buyers and logistics, even category managers, have been saying, well, we have a lot more competitive discounts with UPS. However, they don't really take into consideration what I just talked through, that discount could mean something totally different. You need to be comparing the net rates, which just means you need to be comparing the rates after, the discounts are run through the whole tariff calculation methodology. So in conclusion, once you're having the carriers in a sourcing process or sourcing event quote under this universal tariff structure, it's going to make it easier to optimize your routing guide, where you might actually use multiple different carriers. You can see who has the best discount per each region. And again, it's all under that level playing field, apples to apples basis. You can see where it's going to make sense to use a specific carrier based off of their discount on Zarlite. Not only is it easier to optimize your routing guide and to choose which carrier you're going to use for specific shipments as they come up, it's going to be easier to negotiate going forward with these carriers since they're, again, all on the same cost basis. It just makes it a lot easier to manage, a lot easier to negotiate going forward, and you can kind of leverage them against each other. So that's pretty much it in terms of best practices and things to consider when sourcing LTL. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Source One podcast. For more strategic sourcing and procurement insights every day, visit our blog, The Strategic Sorcerer. Want to provide feedback or suggest a topic for a future episode? Let us know at prrequest@sourceoneinc.com. Thanks for listening.